you have to start with your own culture, your own leadership, and you have to ask yourself if you're actually leading well. And there's no one way to be a good leader. There's lots of different ways. There's lots of different cultures.
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business.
Hey, everybody. So excited to be welcoming Steve Rice to the podcast today. Owners of manufacturing and CPG companies find that Steve's wide range of skills, outside of the box thinking, and more than 30 years of experience make working with him a mentally expansive experience. He has the ability to reach into the dispersed corners of your business and bring them all together, helping you make and implement wise technology and culture decisions. He is technical, personable, and knowledgeable, and I'm very happy to call you a friend of mine, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Thank you, David. It is my distinct pleasure to be here. And I want to actually point out what you just read. One of my customers actually wrote that about me. And I asked them for permission to use that as part of my bio. So it might sound like I paid like a professional to write a bio that said great things about me. That's actually a direct quote written in an email from a customer.
Oh, I love it because all of it, having gotten to know you now for some time, all of it I can certainly attest to. So spot on that it came from a customer. I really love it. So we're going to be talking about success for manufacturers through systems, leadership, and culture today. And I think that you and I get along so well because we resonate on all three of those areas very well. Systems are obviously a key factor in driving growth through your business, but you really can't do much with systems without people and a culture of, true leadership. So excited to get into this with you today. Can you talk about, from your perspective, Steve, where should manufacturers start? That's a question that's kind of broad, but I think one that is on a lot of people's mind when you're talking about driving growth through the systemization, leadership, and culture perspective. Where should we start?
That's a tough question to answer because there are so many places to start, right? I think every business is going to be completely different and they're going to start in a different spot. I think you have to somehow start though at the top with the leader and or leaders and understand their own culture. I think as my friend Ryan Wicklund just said to me a couple hours ago, it's naturally difficult to be in business. And there are more people who are bad at business than there are who are good at business. And it's not because they're not good people. It's just like most people who run businesses didn't get an MBA. And I think having an MBA does not guarantee you're going to be good at business either.
That is very true. That is very true.
So one answer I think is you have to start with your own culture, your own leadership, and you have to ask yourself if you're actually leading well. And there's no one way to be a good leader. There's lots of different ways. There's lots of different cultures. You have to ask yourself that. And I think maybe in my experience, most of the manufacturers that I work with, they're between 10 and 250 million. Most of the time, what they're lacking is a third party outside the company who can provide a little more truth than they're getting from inside the company. But I think you also have to instill a culture of accountability and truth inside, because you need your people to be telling the same story to themselves. So one answer is to say start at the top and make sure you've got your culture right, your leadership right, and that all the rest of the company knows about it. Another answer is I'm a really big believer in Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints. And, it takes work to do this. So one answer you could say is start with that. You don't even have to read the book. The theory
but you
of
should read the
constraints.
book. If you haven't read the book, you should read the book.
You should read the book. But what I love about it is it's really simple. You envision your business like a link of a chain of links, and then you ask yourself, what's the weakest link in the chain? And it could be that it's culture. It could be systems. It could be the website. It could be Bob down in shipping, right? Or it could be the system that Bob has been forced to use that just doesn't work. And look at your company like that. And the important thing about that, the rule is, if you find that weak link, subordinate all the activities you're doing and fix that link. Don't try and fix 18 links at once.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, so many great things in both of the answers that you gave. The first kind of way to think about this, and what I will often say is, look in the mirror. Right? If you are in a leadership position, if you're the business owner, look in the mirror, because to your point, most manufacturers have been good at the thing, right? I've said this often, but they're good at the thing. That's how the business started, how it's grown to wherever it is today. But it's also the thing that's more than likely holding you back. So by taking a look in the mirror, by starting at the top, by doing some reflection and having some accountability for where you're at today, where you want to go, and then seeking resources and seeking support. Again, to what you said, having a resource outside of the company, having somebody that has the ability to see things from a whole perspective, that can bring some additional input and ideas into what you're trying to do. I think that all of those things are key. And on your second answer, I have a funny story to share about the book, The Goal, specifically, which is the book that we were talking about, in case you were wondering out there. But when I was younger, I was never much of a reader. And my dad actually owned a print manufacturing company, and he gave me that book. And he said, you got to read this book. It's tremendous. I just got finished with it, really talked it up. I was thinking, yeah. Okay. So, I read a little bit of it and I was like, this is crazy. I'm not reading any of this stuff. So it wasn't
another business book. I could just look at the chapters,
right?
Maybe read the first paragraph of each thing and move on. Right?
Exactly. And so it was funny because I didn't come back to it for a couple of years. And when I finally did, and I finally sat down and read the whole thing, I started giving the book away to people because it was like, earth shattering, groundbreaking, where's this stuff been? And so, it was one of those times in my life where, had I only listened to, my dad at the time, I would have been, much further ahead. But it kind of goes to the point of what you were saying with starting from the top and taking a look at all of those things to ultimately be able to impact what's going on in your business.
Yeah. Well, what's true is that when your dad handed that to you, you just weren't ready for it. And the universe waited until you were ready.
That must be it. So Steve, what kind of would you say to somebody that's in leadership and wants to, they're on this mission to start making some of these changes, and we want to talk about maybe some KPIs that we should be taking a look at that would either trigger some action in terms of identifying, hey, this is an area of constraint. What are some of those things that we can look at and that you've utilized in your past?
Now, are you asking specifically about leadership KPIs, or are you asking more about business KPIs that are a result of good leadership, or both?
Yeah, I would say both, to be honest, because I think to your earlier point is that it starts on the leadership side. So some things that we can identify from a leadership perspective, and then kind of taking that one step further into how that ultimately is going to impact, moving the needle throughout the business.
Okay. Well, when I work directly with owners and CEOs and executives, I'm actually asking them about what I call spousal KPI, or seems like a lot of because I come from the outdoor world, a lot of the people I worked with are guys who are also fishermen. It seems to be a trend. I don't have a lot of executives I work with who golf, but so river KPI is another thing that I use. These are things I'm actually trademarking. Because from an executive or owner standpoint, if you're running a business and it's really hard and maybe you're making difficult decisions or making incorrect decisions, or you've got a culture that's not working for you, like you're going to go home and you're going to be upset. You're going to bring it home, right? And hopefully your spouse is phenomenal. But if you can sleep better at night and you have a better relationship with your spouse, or you get to like actually be in the river more and not be thinking about your work, then my job as an advisor is going well. So I would, and I also tell them, you need to sort of apply this to the rest of your executive team. Like you don't want your executive team, I think, in this day and age, thinking about your business on Saturday while they're having dinner with their wife, and or while they're while she's coaching the gymnastics team on the weekend. That's, I don't know, lifestyle matters more and more to people. And especially right now, we're in this scenario where they're actively reporting in the New York Times and everywhere else, like the great, I was going to call it the great quitting, but there's the other word
resignation,
for it.
Great resignation.
Yeah. And the great resignation is happening because of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And people don't want, all over the world, they do not want to sit in a box and be treated like a number. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's that our lives matter, that our lifestyle matters. And from a business standpoint, if you want to have a great company, build the company that you would want to work for. That's why I'm sitting where I am today. Because I started work actually as a gardener when I was like 12, and then I've worked at Taco Bell and Spaghetti Factory and numerous other restaurants. I've worked for REI, Adventure 16, which was a big company in the outdoor industry in the 90s. And some of them are great companies, and some of them weren't so great. And I always said to myself, I want to build a company that I would want to work for. And in the last 20 years, I think that's all I've done. And I've helped other people build companies that other people want to work for as well. So as far as how does that work its way into the company? I think it does that automatically. That the second part of your question.
Yeah.
If you build a culture with yourself and with the leaders, you build an area where people can be honest with each other. And let's be clear, you're going to fail a lot. Just because there are moments when people can't be honest with each other doesn't mean that you've failed in having a company that has, a culture of honesty, because you just can't be 100% perfect.
Yeah.
So that's just my caveat. Don't beat yourself up if you have situations where people are like being dishonest with each other. You have to deal with it, but that's going to work its way down through the entire company. The secondary answer to your question, how do you take that and sort of build it down into the company and have it actually be effective, is I like to talk about MBWAs, which is management by walking around. And, there's a difference between MBWA and micromanagement. MBWA is where you're walking around and you're asking people how they're doing. You're eliciting the things that are actually going wrong, with their lives. And if you have a culture of honesty and they trust you and they say, yeah, I don't really understand this ERP. It takes me hours to do something that I think should take me 10 minutes. Like you've just identified something that goes in your list of constraints,
Yeah.
So that's how you do that. And I'm going to keep answering this question because I think one of the things that companies do when they grow a little bit, even if they know this, they get the owner does their little management by walking around. Then you get the executive team, and when they have 3 people on the executive team, or maybe 3 people in management, it's like 10 million. They don't really have a CFO and a CTO and a CMO yet, but they have a marketing director and a accountant.
Yep.
You know, they talk to their people a little bit. Eventually, they go to the spot where, and it's natural, where they stop walking. The executive team stops walking around, and they replace that with a committee that they then say, well, why don't you go figure this out and you tell me? So they abrogate their own responsibility for walking around to somebody else. The challenge was that person, they're not actually abrogating the walking around, because they're not recognizing what they're just saying is, just go tell me the answer to this, so I don't have to think about it.
Right.
That's where breakdowns occur. And
Yeah.
and that's where siloing occurs and miscommunication occurs. Yeah. So
yeah, I like that you brought that up, because, you know, a couple of things. I mean, again, a ton of valuable stuff in what you're saying there. Two things that really jump out at me. Number one, a lot of the time I will hear things like, when we talk about management by walking around, well, I don't want to micromanage people. I don't want to always be out there and, you know, visible, and, you know, I've got all these other things going on. And so I like that you brought that up. And, you know, from my standpoint, it's exactly what you said. It is engaging with people. It is, you know, talking about things outside of the office to understand ultimately what impact that's going to bring into the office, because that's a real thing, right? And if you've got somebody that's going through something, whether that's medical or financial, I mean, it could be a host of things. If you show up and are, you know, mindful and really engaged and have empathy for people, that's going to go miles to build that relationship of trust, where when something else is going on, whether that's, hey, I have a really good idea for XYZ, or I have a problem with this, people are going to approach you. So, you know, I love that you brought that up. And I also love the part that you brought up on, you know, where that breakdown ultimately occurs through that growth. And I know for me, you know, kind of growing up in an old school top-down management style, that was the unlock for me. You know, the whole reason I was able to be successful throughout my corporate career was that it finally clicked. I need to engage people. I need to, you know, provide the tools and the support to get these things done. And the only way you can do that is by that management, by walking around. So I really appreciate you kind of, you know, going into that. And maybe we could step into that a little bit further, because I'd love to talk about, you know, some best practices, maybe when it comes to either that management by walking around, how we can, you know, break down those silos. If we're now in that, let's call it, you know, $20 million range, we've got some additional layers underneath us. And now we're, you know, so busy doing things in the office that we can't make our way back out to the shop floor. Maybe you can talk about some best practices that you've come across to help leaders break through that.
Well, I think maybe one of the simplest things is, you know, you have to recognize when you're the owner that you can't stop walking around. You know, my business partner, Stephen, one of his family friends, his father's family friends was, I'm not going to remember the name, but the guy who helped like turn around Colgate Palmolive and turn them into, you know, multi-million-dollar juggernaut. And Stephen remembers basically walking through their corporate offices. I think he interned there or something when he was like a teenager. And this is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. Everybody knows those two names, Colgate Palmolive. And he walked through the shipping room and he'd be like, "Hey, John, how are things going?" Like, he knew everybody's name. "How's your son Jonah doing?" You know, and he did this every day. He made trips through various parts of the company. And so if someone's, you know, in a $20 million business or 10, and they're like, "I don't have time to walk around," you know, it's like, really, you know, guy, there are different ways to walk around, so to speak. And I'll give you a really good example. One of my favorite stories is about Paul O'Neill, who, he's one of those really super huge corporate dudes. He was the CEO of Alcoa, right? And I think he ended up being in several different, both, you know, Democrat and Republican administrations as, you know, a minister of finance or business or something. I forget what titles he had, but the guy's been around a long time. When he went to Alcoa, And this speaks to like, how do you do management by walking around when you have a massive corporation that's worldwide? He went to an investors meeting and everybody was kind of like, what's he going to say? Because he's new. And he said, look, we're going to focus the entire company on one metric. Talk about metrics. And our metric is going to be worker days lost to illness or sickness, or injury or sickness. And the way the story I've heard is like, but all the stock investors and portfolio people like ran out of the room and said, sell, sell, sell. Because they were like, who is this guy? Right. But what he said was, look, here's my cell number. I'm giving out my phone number. And I want to make sure that everybody in this company, all the way down to the person who's working on the factory floor making aluminum cans, knows that their immediate superiors have an unlimited budget to ensure the safety of our employees. And if anyone, and I'm letting my managers know the same thing, right? And so if you identify anything that could hurt somebody in any way, I expect you to fix it right away and send me a bill. There's an unlimited budget for this. And there was a story in which, I think it was a factory in Mexico, and the region was being, managed by someone who's being groomed to take over for Paul O'Neill. And one of the safety things that they had done is they painted a yellow line around a machine that could rip people's arms off, And Paul O'Neill had actually said in that meeting, raise your hand if you would like to lose an arm, right? So, of course, nobody raised their hand, except for him. But so somebody lost an arm or a limb or something at that factory, and he was like, you know what, that's unconscionable, And they went from having lots of worker days lost to injury and illness, because people would just call in sick because they didn't want to go to work. People don't only call in sick when they're sick.
Yeah.
For good companies, they only call in sick when they're sick. For companies that they don't feel like care about them, they call in sick every time they can, every chance they get, or for small minor reasons. So he basically did like a global corporate management by walking around, because he's like, I can't be there, right? Yeah. But I'm authorizing you to walk around. You tell your immediate supervisor, and if they don't fix it, tell their immediate supervisor. And if somebody gets hurt, there's going to be consequences. And it had a major effect on that business, revolutionized the way that business ran. And of course, people started paying attention to that. So he referred to that as a non-arguable goal, right? It's not arguable. There are not people who are like, yeah, I'll lose an arm for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
so what are you going to do in your company that's going to be non-arguable? How is your company going to be? How are you going to take a KPI like that or an idea like that and put it in your company so that everybody knows they're responsible for that corporate culture?
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, one of the things I think about when that question comes up is, even if you've not been great at management by walking around for whatever reason, have some accountability and some humility to engage your team and say that, hey, I've not done a great job at this, but I'm committed to doing a better job at it. And I want you to hold me accountable to it. I mean, to me, it's the same thing as kind of this story that you illustrated, and recognizing that there is something to kind of hang your hat on, from whether you want to say a metric standpoint or what have you. It's all about being able to identify those different things throughout your business and moving towards them, right? Some days are going to be a bigger struggle than others. Some days you're just not going to, get out of bed and jump up and do it. And other days it's going to come more natural, but the more energy and effort and focus you put on things like that, the better your business will be in the long run. I firmly believe that.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up those two words, humility and accountability. Because you can certainly run a business without being humble, right?
Yeah.
And you could also run a business without being accountable, but it's not going to be as fun for the people that work for you, and they're going to go find a leader that they can actually work for. When people jump ship to somewhere else, they're usually following leaders, not just people or ideas, right? And or more naturally now, actually, I think a lot of people are sitting in companies where they have a lot of lateral opportunities, but not a lot of upward mobility opportunities. And so the only way you can get an upward mobility opportunity is to switch companies, and make that happen. But
yeah, I mean,
so humility, accountability are really important, I think, in a leader.
I would say too, it's, it goes back to what we were talking about with the Great Resignation, right? I mean, whether it's because of an upward mobility issue or because it's lack of leadership with it, throughout an organization, I mean, all of that falls on leadership shoulders. So if you're not paving a way and giving people an opportunity to see how their career trajectory can come together that aligns with their vision, right? I mean, that's the point of this stuff, is that it's interesting to see companies. We're talking manufacturers, so you can take two print manufacturers, two machine shop owners that sell the same types of products, and one of them will be talking about how they have more people and that they're growing at double digit rates year over year, and the other one will be talking about how it's impossible to find anybody that wants to work, how everything just is a nightmare inside of their organization. And what's the reason for that, right? It's all the stuff that we're talking about. I mean, that is what we're talking about when we are talking about culture and leadership and systemization. Those are the things that you're really trying to achieve in your business, and that's how it shows up. At least from my perspective, that's how it shows up in the things that you're saying about your business.
Yeah. Well, and I have a friend that I work on advisory boards with, and he's a partner with me in the Globally Conscious Leader, John Lamy. Great guy. And he likes to tell this story about a company that he went to work with, or was trying. I think he worked a little bit and was deciding if he really wanted to dive in. And basically he found out, for lack of a better term, that the owner was an a-hole, and he sat with this guy and talked to him about the importance of culture, because there's I'm forgetting the name of the guy who said culture eats strategy for lunch, right? But this guy basically talked about how great he was, and then talked about how horrible all the employees were, and then lamented that he felt like these people, they didn't work hard enough, and everybody was looking at the clock at 3:00 in the afternoon, waiting till they get home. Well, they were, and it was because of him, And when John realized that this person was not capable of the type of self-reflection that they needed in order to change themselves and change the culture, you don't want to bail out on people willy-nilly, but you got to recognize a lost cause, perhaps. So
yeah,
I think most people aren't like that. That was an extreme example.
But a poignant one, right? Back to what we said, starting at the top, looking in the mirror, because I would agree. Most people are not like that, but you do run across them, and it could be an owner, it could be somebody on your management team. And as an owner or somebody that is on the executive team, you need to be mindful of these things, because that one person can ruin a company very fast, very fast. So, Steve, you brought it up, but I want to talk about the Globally Conscious Leader and what that kind of initiative is. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the program that you have, and how all of it works.
Well, it's a passion project of mine, and it started with John Lamy and I talking. This guy, just to mention him briefly, like, he's brilliant. He's an MIT engineering grad, worked for HP for many years, invented things, was head of a quality assurance department, actually met, Packard, Hewlett and Packard, had them doing management by walking around, with him. Also has an MBA from Cornell, is wicked smart. And we kept saying we have to do something together, and we're both deeply concerned with leaders and leadership. We're deeply concerned with learning. I think if I ever stop learning, then I might as well be dead.
Yeah.
And we're concerned about the global imperative, the global economy, and the way it runs. For me, it came out of the outdoor industry, which is supposed to be one of the greener industries in the world in terms of the way they think about stuff, or I should say in the world of Patagonia, we're trying to, this is the industry that's pushing people like Walmart to be more green. At the same time, having been the owner, worked at and been the owner of an outdoor store at various stages in my life, I've been lucky to have about 8 different lives. I know that when you get a box of stuff from North Face or from anybody else and you're checking it in a retail store, whether it's REI or it's a little mom and pop shop in Alabama, every single item has a plastic bag, a non-recyclable plastic bag, or maybe it is recyclable, but it's still going in the trash.
Yeah.
And there's just a ton of waste. And so I was actually having a conversation with Liz Capance, who is a globally recognized headhunter. And I asked her, how often do corporations on their side of the headhunting scenario, or CEOs and executives on their side on their CV, talk about or mention sustainability or circular economy thinking when they're looking to hire or looking to find a job? And this is someone who's been doing it for years. And she said, it never happens. They're just not talking about it. We all know about it. And I was like, that's got to stop. Right.
Yeah.
So the globally conscious leader was founded by John and I because we believe that we need to generate advocates, is the word I'm looking for, inside companies at every level. And part of that comes out of the fact that we both believe, and I think this is very true, that there are leaders in every company and all over the world in different areas. Like there are leaders at Taco Bell, there are leaders that are working as janitors, in corporations. There are leaders everywhere, right? So the goal of the globally conscious leader, and the reason we named it the globally conscious leader, is we want to educate and create advocates one leader at a time at all levels inside of a company to be the advocates for sustainable thinking and circular economy thinking inside their company. So it doesn't have to be the CEO. It'd be nice if it was, because the CEO can say to the 8 people on the executive team and the 32 people below them, okay, so now us 41 folks, we're all going to become advocates of sustainability. So what we did is we're leveraging my relationships in the outdoor industry to gather together people who are experts in sustainable thinking, or at least actively working on it. Who, I don't want to take the time to define what an expert is, but someone who's competent and is thinking about it every day. That's it. To me, that's it, right? And so I've gotten folks like Alex Lover, great guy. He is the director of product innovation and sustainability for outdoor research. And outdoor research makes gloves and the world famous Seattle sombrero, which is like one of the great rain hats. Why would they invent a rain hat for Seattle? I don't know. But he's deeply interested in it. Because he's in product development and he's working with factories all over the world, including onshore ones. He's aware of the waste in production, right? And as a company, they want to reduce their waste and find things to do with it. And they want to be better. So every day they wake up asking themselves, as Clark Campbell, who's the owner of GearAid, who's also one of our mentors, said, it's important to wake up just figuring out how to be less brown. Anyone who says that they're sustainable or green is probably not telling you the truth, because you're just not there. And these are guys who know the numbers. If you talk to Alex, he's deeply involved in understanding like the Paris Accords. He's deeply involved in understanding policy at the national and local levels. and he totally gets it, and he says, if we're talking about circular economy, like it's broken, right? There's a wheel to the circular economy that says I somehow I sell something and it's got to come back to me or be reused as something else. And we're not doing that. And the capability of doing that isn't really in place yet, because we don't have enough people advocating for it inside a broad range of businesses. So Globally Conscious Leader, we have a program where we want to connect the mentors to people who want to learn about it, become advocates in their business. We're actually developing an online class as well. We might actually, I think we're going to do this because we already have the structure in our brains, but we've got an author who wants to help us write a book. The main goal, like I said, we want to create advocates in every industry and at all levels of leadership around the idea of sustainability. And here's a good example. I can't remember which company is doing it. It might actually be outdoor research, but there's a couple companies in the Pacific Northwest that are taking their production waste and either selling it cheaply or giving it to a guy who makes dog beds, and they're using it as it's all the production waste is being used as padding in dog beds.
Okay.
There's another guy named Jason Ling in Seattle. His company is called recycledwaiters.com. It just as an example. He's actually taking all the dead stock waders from companies like Sims, Orvis, Patagonia, Cabela's, and cutting the boots off, grinding those up, and actually those are going to a dog bed maker. I don't know if it's the same guy, but then he's washing and flaying out the waders, and he's created designs that he can turn those into waist packs and backpacks and wallets and belts and other things. And so he's literally reusing all the fabric from these waders that have pinholes in them, or and there are some large batches like waders that came from Asia and showed up on shore and weren't the quality that they needed to be, so they're just dead stock, right? And he's taking those and turn them into other things. And then the production waste from that is going to dog beds. So there are ways to do this.
Yeah,
but everybody's got to be thinking about it.
It's amazing what, it's amazing what you guys are putting together to make it approachable and to bring the topic to the forefront. I have been in manufacturing the majority of my life, and it was fairly unfamiliar to me. I had heard the term, circular manufacturing, but was never really that familiar with it. And I had Eduardo Martinez on the podcast. And,
great guy.
Oh, amazing the amount of knowledge when it comes to the circular manufacturing thought process. And I'll just share one thing, but it's a tremendous episode. And I love, to me, how these two things are tying together. But Eduardo had talked about, starting with the end in mind. So starting with the, what can be recycled out of these components that we're ultimately making, and having that as part of the engineering phase that goes into some of the product development. So obviously that is, a completely different layer of what you're talking about. But the fact that and this was for a really large company that he utilized that example. I like the fact that you're making this approachable to really anybody that's interested in it and starting to drive these conversations, because it's not going away, right? We have to figure out new and unique ways that we can utilize and recycle and sustain what is going on. So I love the fact that you guys have started this, and that you're out there trying to get the conversation started and continued to grow. So appreciate that.
Yeah, well, the conversation, certainly won't lay claim to starting the conversation. Conversations are happening out there on a major level, with Glasgow, the Paris Accords, all that kind of stuff. The question is, how is that going to get implemented? And if businesses wait for the policymakers at the international level to do something, so that the policy levels at the policy folks at the national level do something, which we know how quickly that moves. so that then there's, policy level people at the state level to do stuff. Like we're going to be waiting a long time. All of that stuff has to happen, right? And I'm not downplaying the importance of international, national, and regional policy, because I think it plays a huge role. At the same time, businesses have opportunities to differentiate themselves in a positive way by taking this on now. And they also have an opportunity to create new revenue streams that they hadn't seen before. And one really obvious one is you're a sheet metal, or you work in metal and stamping, and you have a lot of production waste in the terms of that metal. Like traditionally, that's just gone into a dumpster and then headed off into the landfill. Well, that's actually stuff that can be, melted down and reused by somebody. And there are plenty of companies who are taking whatever the production waste is that they have, and it's actually a profit center for them. So if you're a business owner and you're listening to this, this isn't some sort of like left-wing hippy dippy, let's be good to the planet thing. It's got to be a piece of that. That's going to be the result. Yeah. But more like it's going to be better for all of us, not just the hippy dippies. This is a business decision. You can differentiate yourself now and make more money if you're thinking about this now. And it's going to be better for the business. It's going to be better for the community. It's going to be better for your customers. And you can tell your customers you did it. I have a friend who has worked on policy and whatnot in the Pacific Northwest for NOAA and other nonprofits. And one of the examples he had that was really interesting was that he had gotten a grant to work with a nonprofit who was trying to figure out how to increase water quality. And everybody was thinking about rivers and riparian zones and things. And then what he did, he said, what are the businesses that like use a lot of water, And someone was like, well, probably car washes, maybe, So this nonprofit decided, well, we're actually going to have an initiative. We're going to go start talking to the people who are running car washes. And even though there were no policies in place that, actually, let me put it another way. There were policies in place that allowed people who ran car washes to put a little bit more stuff into the ecosystem than most of us would want, right? But they basically went to them and said, look, if you do these things and we'll help you, it's part of our grant, you can actually have wastewater that's less dangerous to the fish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can tell people that you're doing this, and then you will have a differentiation point for your own business. And they actually created companies, car wash companies, that were being more successful in business against their competitors because they did this. And then what happens? The competitors go, well, we need to do this too. Yeah. So they completely revolutionize an entire industry without making policy changes, simply on the basis of competitiveness and marketability.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, and I agree with you. It's not, it starts off with the thought of doing good, but it's much, much bigger than that. And it could be, a real differentiator in your business multiple ways. So I appreciate you going into that. Steve, this has been tremendous, and I always appreciate learning from you and listening to your insights. For the people that are out there that would like to connect with you, learn a little bit more, where's the best place that they can do that?
Well, I like to jokingly say you can Google me on LinkedIn. you can find me on LinkedIn. You'll see, type in Steve Rice and you'll find, globally conscious leader in .com jungle. The websites are .comjungle.com, the globallyconsciousleader.com. Those are the places to check me out. And I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to learn about businesses that are doing great things. I'd like to meet people. I'm really about relationships. And this is a great one with you, David. I really appreciate you having me on. And I look forward to chatting you again, both on and off the air.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I will make sure to put those links in the show notes for everybody that's out there. Steve, I just want to say thanks again for being on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching the Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.